And now we're joined by former Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib. A very good morning to you, Ben.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us. A couple of questions I want to talk specifically about Keir Starmer's speech yesterday. One, the question we're putting to our audience in terms of him being accused of echoing Enoch Powell after the Prime Minister warned mass immigration risks Britain making Britain an island of strangers. First of all, do you think Keir Starmer was right to say that? And two, do you think that criticism from Labour MPs, well, mostly suspended Labour MPs, like John McDonnell and Zara Sultana, actually helps the Prime Minister?
Well, if he's trying to appeal to what he thinks are reform voters, then I suppose that criticism helps. Though I don't think the average reform voter fits into the kind of category that, Zara Sultana may have in her mind. It seems to me they think that the average reform voter is some kind of swivel-eyed right-wing lunatic, and that's not the case. Yeah, that may be the case. That may be what they think, but that is not reality. The vast majority of people who vote reform are sensible-minded British citizens who care about this country's economy, culture, constitution, and wish it to go forward in peace and prosperity, which is perfectly reasonable. And to compare what Starmer said in Parliament yesterday to Enoch Powell is completely wrong, because actually what we've got now is mass migration coupled with discrimination in favour of those who've come to this country, the setting aside of the democratic mandate, if you like. The interests of the majority have been set aside in the pursuit of the promotion and celebration of all the various minorities we've now got in this country. And we've made no tilt at all about, towards integration. Indeed, our policy of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as I was indicating, celebrates diversity, and people are encouraged to stay in their cultural silos. Yeah. And what we will see, and I think you touched on it earlier, is a breakdown. You talked about community policing and so on. We're going to see ever greater requirement for draconian policing as our society fragments. And in a sense, what I've just said doesn't make any sense, because the word society in itself means a settled culture. We don't have a settled culture in this country anymore. We struggle to define what it means to be British. I think a lot of politicians do. I don't think most British people do, of any background. No, I mean, I was just about to go on and say that when I was a child, I had no trouble defining what being British meant. But we set aside our understanding of our nation, our history, our culture, our beliefs, our values, in favor of a kind of codified Human Rights Act, which informs us about what we can and can't do, which was then built upon by the Equalities Act, and then all the progressive discrimination that went with it.
It's fascinating you brought that up, because that is all kind of part and parcel of this whole idea that sort of the majority, let's face it, the majority white native Britain of the past. Well, it's still a majority white, because but there's been massive changes racially, ethnically, religiously, and others in recent years. But that somehow was a bad thing, and what we've got now is a good thing, because diversity is our strength, etc. Whereas actually the evidence around the world is actually hugely diverse societies actually don't prosper as well as societies that are actually more cohesive. And again, I don't think that has to have anything to do with colour. I think it does, though, have issues with certain religions. It has issues with cultural norms and expectations and values and belief systems. So those are relevant. In terms of Keir Starmer speaking on this issue, saying things which, I mean, I'm absolutely flabbergasted by some of the stuff he said, because if the Tory leader had said stuff he said yesterday, if the Reform leader Nigel Farage had said it, if you said it, he would have called you all far right. He'd even said, "Oh, you sound like Enoch Powell." And now he's getting the criticism from the far left. I mean, look, admittedly, they're all completely nuts and wrong about everything. However, what do you make of the things that Keir Starmer had to say and the context in which he said them?
Well, Keir Starmer flip-flops on just about every single issue when he thinks he needs to, in order to curry favour with the electorate. He's not doing a very good job, because his policies that he implements are absolutely disastrous for this country. But I think we've got to do away with this discourse that categorises people either as left-wing or right-wing. It's such a dated and inappropriate for description. I know very few people who are right-wing. I would say Reform is actually not right-wing. If you look at some of Reform UK's policies, actually they're quite, they're quite sort of socialist in a sense, wanting to nationalise energy companies, for example.
That's
not
not
a right-wing.
socialist. That's actually remarkably normal in Western European countries.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They're not. They can't be classified as a right-wing party. And I think the big difference in politics now is between those, and I would categorize Starmer firmly in this camp, those that wish to govern the country through global liberal principles and don't care whether migration is completely unchecked and don't really care what the composition of our demography is, don't care about the culture, our history, and so on. There's that lot, and Starmer's firmly in amongst them. And that those of us who recognize, in my view correctly, that in order for a peaceful, prosperous country, you need social cohesion. It is absolutely critical that you have social cohesion. We have to work together. It's the only way the country can go forward. We've got to have an identity in which we believe and which we're prepared to promote and fight for. And, we've seen that in certain statistics recently where the youth aren't prepared to go to war for this country.
Yeah.
That should be deeply, deeply worrying for anyone in government. And so it's not between left and right. It's about those of us who recognize the importance of social cohesion in our country and the economic prosperity that comes with it.
I think to a certain extent, as you say, it's between globalists and nationalists, people who actually recognize the concept of the nation state. I mean, people who think that anyone who comes to live here should have a right to vote here, as opposed to the concept of being a citizen and being entitled, therefore, to more rights. It's quite interesting, isn't it? In terms of, the extraordinary stats, Sun pointed this out yesterday, and it's in today's paper, that, basically 500 people arrived illegally on boats across the Channel, those dinghies, yesterday. 200 of them while the Prime Minister was speaking yesterday morning because of the calm waters in the sunshine. That just makes a mockery, because the Prime Minister's talking about legal migration, which they've not got to grips with at all, and even on their promises, doesn't touch the sides of what British population want. Long way from the tens of thousands. We're looking at around the 500,000 mark. I'm sorry, that is a net arrivals every year. That's not going to fly with voters at all. Even if it got down to 300,000, that's not going to be the right sort of number for most. But at the same time, illegal migration, the gang's not smashed, the boats are not stopped, completely out of control.
So the illegal migration thing is very interesting because our inability to enforce our borders, I think, stems from the same issues that we were talking about in terms of the Human Rights Act and the Equalities Act, where the Human Rights Act informs us in this country that everyone is equal. And so instead of discharging its primary obligation, which is the protection of this country and civil society in this country, actually the government is hijacked by the Human Rights Act and is seeking to protect those who are coming into this country illegally.
I think it's actually, and if you look at the European Convention on Human Rights, is that Article 8, the one that everyone's using to stay here because their son doesn't like chicken nuggets in Albania and the like. But actually, it's not just an interpretation; it's a complete misinterpretation of that Article 8. They're just ignoring the second paragraph of that article, which is about the Vista Society and law and order, etc., etc. But it's activist judges that are the problem. I think you could change the law tomorrow, wouldn't make any difference because we've still got the activist judge class.
I agree with that too, by the way. Even if you were to remove the Human Rights Act, you've still got a massive endemic problem with the judiciary, some of whom are members of things like Refugee Legal Support, an organization that uses the ECHR and the Human Rights Act, weaponizes it to keep people here. But the slightly broader point I was making was that through the Human Rights Act, we've lost an understanding of what it means to be a British citizen because we've put all of humanity on a level pegging. Being a British citizen doesn't afford you any greater rights or protections in this country. And that's why we can't enforce our borders, because the Prime Minister sees those trying to enter the country illegally completely in the same light as those who are already here.
Yeah, I do think that's a very key problem. Ben, we're going to have to leave it there. Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP, thank you very much. Thompson, do you want to come back in on this whole, is it left and right anymore? You're someone, you and I find ourselves agreeing quite an awful lot of issues, and yet you very much come from sort of, a Marxist left in your background, don't you?
Not that they would accept us as on the left anymore, I dare say, but I think
you're far right.
No, exactly.
It's so difficult to keep up.
Who isn't, it's hard to tell these days. But it's one of those things where I think the left-right paradigm really does make a lot of sense, because a lot of the things that, say, we at Spiked have always stood up for, sovereignty, freedom, and so on, have become kind of right-wing coded for some bizarre kind of reason.
There should be, I would say, British values.
No, absolutely, and a sort of universal. So it's one of those things where I think a lot of the old political labels don't make a lot of sense anymore, and they also don't always make perfect sense with our politics, because, you know, you've got Reform who recognise that they've, on certain policies, they're looking to draw in an electorate who are actually quite left-wing in some respects, but also quite socially conservative in others.
But people in this country are socially conservative. Economically, they are very much on the left-wing side. Tom said, thank you very much.